Hi, everybody. My name is Kara. Today, we're going to be talking about the power of poetry. So, we're going to be talking about the fundamentals of how to start writing poetry and what poetry comprises of.
I want to just mention that this very first workshop is sponsored by Mental Health America Los Angeles, as well as Island 17, LA Media Consultants, Hawaii Marketing LLC, Eco Design Lab, and Eco Art Lab. And if you want more information on them, they are on the website, which is otbseries.com. And if you want information about other workshops, there's a full calendar. And we are giving away weekly, if not daily, we'll figure it out, another free workshop. So just check back on the website. Sorry about that.
No worries. That's wonderful. We have a ton of awesome classes and mediums that are going to be taught. Definitely get the word out and take those classes. This class was originally called A Moment in Time with Moi, and we will be talking about the power of poetry. So let's get into it. To start off, we will be learning about how to start writing your own poetry in this class. So like I said, we're going to be talking about the elements, the techniques, the features, different styles that all of y'all can explore when you are starting out writing poetry. The goal of this class is to learn how to read and write poetry, but ultimately it's to teach you what the consequences of intended and unintended communication looks like. This is all based on the specific words that are chosen and how they are placed in a poetic structure. So what is the power of poetry after, learning about the building blocks and what the consequences are? The power of poetry is self-expression, being able to bring out your internal world into the external world and share that with other people who are also experiencing their own internal worlds as it relates to the physical realities that we live in. It's a really great way to get out of your head and to think about life, and it's a great way to exercise coping skills with mental health. Since this creative workshop series is about mental health, the power of poetry, as I'm teaching it, is also a way of improving your mental health and just being able to cope with the fact that we always have to think, we're always conscious unless we're asleep.
I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to encourage anybody to chime in with any questions as we go. So my question is to everybody, have any of you written poetry before? Is this something you're completely new at, or do you do other types of writing? Maybe you could just respond in the chat.
So Rocket, you've written poetry before? You have? What kind of poetry have you written?
All kinds. It's something I do all the time. Yeah.
Very cool. We're gonna go over some different genres, different styles. So if this is your first time learning how to write poetry and to read poetry, you'll be getting an idea as to what are some different forms that you can take. Some people have written that they journal, a little bit of poetry in the past, and a lot of other types of writings. I used to do a lot of creative writing, but I've never written poetry. Okay, very cool. Poetry is the art of language, being able to express the unique experience that you have as a human being and the constant state of feeling that we, experience, and being able to put that into words and be able to put that into an intentional structure of words. We're going to be going over the structure of a poem, which is built by verse. That can either be individual lines, stanzas, or an entire poem. We're also going to be going over the building blocks of poetry, which include rhyme, rhythm, and repetition, which will be the main elements that we will be talking about in this class since we have an hour and there's so much to cover. Poetry is a massive genre of writing. There's so much to it, but we want to get the core elements to help y'all jumpstart your own ability to write poetry. Some additional elements include line breaks, the difference between speaker and poet, using narrative to write poetry. So that's writing story in a poetic form, and mimesis, which is just the visual look of a poem as it replicates the subject of what you are talking about in said poem. Lastly, we're going to go over different genres, styles, and forms of poetry, both traditional and modern forms. First, we're going to start off with structure. So this is what the structure of a typical poem will look like. This particular poem is by Robert Frost, titled Dust of Snow. And as you can see, the poem is broken up into, at least in the beginning, 2 stanzas. So a stanza is essentially a paragraph of a poem, and it is a collection of lines, which is just a singular row of words. And then as, the lines are constructed, they are enjambed. So the way a crow and then it breaks off into shook down on me is a line break. Each stanza, as we see it, is divided into 4 lines per paragraph. Does anybody have any questions so far?
Is the stanza always just 4 lines?
No, so it's up to you how many lines you want to include in a stanza. A stanza is just the combination of a certain selection of lines.
Okay.
So now we're going to go into the elements of poetry. So these are the building blocks, and we're going to focus on rhyme, rhythm, and repetition. Rhyme and rhythm are built by what is called meter. I don't know if any of y'all know Byron. A lot of poets who write traditional forms of poetry recognize Byron for his very strict understanding of what is considered to be good poetry and bad poetry. And good poetry is typically identified by its use of meter and rhyme. We live in a world that kind of is more flexible with our understanding of what makes good art versus what makes bad art. That's also a lot to get into. We won't, get too philosophical there, but yeah, we're going to explore what meter is right now. So meter is the structure of a line as it is created by syllables. So for example, red fish, blue fish. Say that's one line. Red fish, blue fish. Those are 4 syllables. Syllables are the number of vowels pronounced in a word. And the examples I provided are hi, which has 1 syllable, and then was up, which has 2 syllables. Vowels typically are connected with consonants, but they don't always have to be. They can be pronounced on their own, or they can be pronounced with a consonant in a word. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Me again. So remember we were talking about like basic poetry, like roses are red, violets are blue. Is
Mhm.
that like a basic example of this?
Yeah, it's a fundamental
Structure.
understanding of how
Okay.
poetry can be written. Mhm.
And I love how you used music as an analogy because it has beats, and I think that's helpful.
Yes, when you get into the more technical aspects of learning poetry, you will learn how to scan a poem based off of the beats and the syllables that are presented in metrical forms of poetry, traditional forms of poetry. That is called scansion, when you scan a poem and you annotate it for syllables and beats, because beats are the emphasis of syllables, and that gets into stressed and unstressed forms of writing poetry, which, like Shakespeare, for example, who wrote iambic pentameter, that is a perfect example of metrical verse that is standard for poetry. So I've provided an example of Hug a War by Shel Silverstein. If any of y'all know who Shel Silverstein is, he wrote books, poetry books for children to help communicate certain themes about life and, make poetry accessible. So now that we have an understanding of what meter is, we can get into rhythm and rhyme schemes. So rhyme schemes are the repetition of words at the end of each line that have either the same vowel sounds or the same consonant sounds. So assonance is repetition of vowel sounds, like in this poem, hug and tug, which are presented towards the end of the first 2 lines and then repeated in the 3rd and 4th lines with hugs and tugs, as well as the word rug, which is in the 6th line. Consonance is the repetition of consonant sounds, which in this poem would be cuddles and giggles. That dulls, gulls, that ulls ending is what makes it consonants. So that is one important element of creating rhythm and a rhyme scheme in a poem. That also includes a repetition of words and phrases like "oh war" at the end of the first 2 lines, and that is considered epistrophe, which is the repetition of words or phrases at the end of a line. And then we also have anaphora in this poem, which is a repetition of words and phrases at the beginning of a line. So like the last 3 lines of this poem, and everyone grins, and everyone cuddles, and everyone wins. So now we're going to get into genres or styles or forms of poetry that can be explored. So on the right side, I have an example of one of my favorite poets. His name is Walt Whitman, and this is from his book, Leaves of Grass, "O Captain, My Captain," which is a poem dedicated to Abraham Lincoln, and it was written around the time of the Civil War. So this is one of the traditional forms of poetry that incorporates this lyrical sense of repetition. Would anybody like to read this poem? Would anybody like to try that out? Don't be shy. It is a little intimidating, but it's fun.
I can read it. Oh no, Cameron, go for it, Cameron.
Okay, O Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack, the prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh heart, 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 oh the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead.
So y'all can hear that rhythm that is being created, that like bouncing in each line that helps to carry what is said in the poem as it is read down each line. Thank you, Cameron, for reading. That was great. I hope that y'all were able to hear that. It's really important that when you are writing poetry, you also read it out loud. Yes, it's read like in waves. Exactly. It flows. And a sign of good poetry will move you based on how it is physically, literally moved down each line. Some common forms within lyric that have a sense of musicality, like this poem, include sonnets, odes, elegies, villanelles, sestinas, limericks, and haikus, just to name a few. And those are usually pretty short poems. So those are some traditional forms. So now we're going to go into some modern forms. And this is an example of free verse, also by Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman was really important for helping to evolve poetry, to develop it from traditional forms into modern forms that are rooted in what's considered to be stream of consciousness writing. Some writers from the 1950s and 60s who are known as the beatnik generation. I don't know if anybody happens to know the beatnik generation. Rocket, awesome. Read artists like Walt Whitman and were inspired by his work to create some of the writing of that time. And some forms include free verse, which is non-rhyming, non-metrical. There is prosaic writing, which is also known as prose poetry, which is essentially like if you were to write an essay, but in a poetic way. So using elements of repetition, rhythm, rhyme, but as if you're writing in paragraph format. So it usually goes from one end of the page to the other end of the page instead of being broken up, say like at a fourth of the page or at a third or whatever, in shorter lengths rather than in full length lines. So that is another form of modern poetry. Acrostic poetry is also really popular in schools, for example, in like elementary schools when children are learning how to write poetry for the first time. So acrostic poems are essentially poems that include the first letter of each line to be combined in order to spell a word. So say you have the word school and you write a poem where each line starts with each letter of the word school. So down the page, it would read SCHOOL, and then you would write each line starting with each letter of that word. So that's an acrostic poem. And then lastly, I've included spoken word, which is a really prominent form of poetry taking place nowadays. And one of the most important poets within the world of spoken word, her name is Sarah Kay, said that it is a genre of poetry that demands to be read aloud. There's something about that writing of poetry that demands to be read out loud. So we're going to get into some examples of that right after this slide. Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay, cool. We are going to first listen to a poem by Sarah Kay titled 14th Amendment.
After she graduated from college, in an effort to avoid returning to the internment camp where her parents were still being held, my grandmother went to teach on a Sioux reservation in South Dakota, where she learned to drive a stick shift and kill and gut a deer. These are three things I do not know how to do, but I also do not know how to leave my parents imprisoned and travel alone by train across a country that has painted my face a red flag, so perhaps what we learn is a matter of necessity. In her East Coast school, where the class photos were an ocean of blue and green eyes, most people had never even heard of internment camps. Perhaps what we learn is a matter of convenience. She was extra ink on every page she landed. I never asked her what the Sioux children thought of her. Woman with familiar black hair and unfamiliar eyes. Woman alone, unmarried, young. Woman quiet and stubborn and stern. Teacher and stranger and alien and friend. I have already written the poem where this country is an abusive husband, and the poem where this country is a neglectful parent, a monster, a wound, a burden, a bad dream, a thief, but they all turn to ash in my mouth. And still, my grandmother stands at the front of a classroom in South Dakota. Still, her brother walks out of the camp and is drafted into the U.S. Army. Still, her mother hangs lace curtains and tries to make a horse's stall feel like a home. Still, her father sits in a barrack where there isn't any wood to carve, so he whittles a peach pit into a tiny ring that will one day fit my smallest finger. What we learn is a matter of resourcefulness. After the war, when her parents were released, they wrote to tell her to come home and get married. What we learn is a matter of inheritance. The Sioux mothers gifted her moccasins for her wedding and a pair for her firstborn child, beaded and bright, the softest leather for the smallest feet. I am told they were sad to see her go. Later, when her own children go to school, bright black hair and eyes spilling across every class photo, they bring the moccasins for show and tell. They do not bring the hand-sewn curtains. They do not bring the peach pit ring or their grandfather's knife or a deer's heart, red and pumping for one brief moment, still alive in their mother's hands.
All right. What did y'all think of that poem?
Wow. That was powerful.
Yeah, the images she adds, right, of that peach pit ring, the heart of the deer, the experience of her grandparents, being interned, very raw and honest. Yes, absolutely. Can definitely see why it needs to be heard rather than read. Yeah, right. It's all about that phonetic experience, hearing how those words are said when they're said out loud. It really, makes the effect of the poem even that more impactful, even that more emotionally moving. It stays with us a little bit more than just when we read something, right?
It's a great example about how really is the power of poetry, sharing your story or your family's story. I mean, it was really so moving.
Yeah, I love her work. I highly recommend checking out her work. At the end of the presentation, I have a list of poets for y'all that I think everybody might like. So that is an example of listening to spoken word poetry. Now we're going to see an example of
After she graduated,
not listening again, but this time we're going to watch a spoken word poet perform spoken word poetry. So let's see. Okay.
I was born on July 27th. That makes me a Leo. I don't really know what that means. I'm 5'6", I weigh 145 pounds. I don't know how to swim, and I'm a sucker for a girl with a nice smile and clean sneakers. I'm still learning how to whisper. I'm often loud in places where I should be quiet. I'm often quiet in places where I should be loud. I was born feet first, and I've been backwards ever since. I like ginger ale. A lot. I've been told that I give really bad hugs. People say it feels like I'm trying to escape. Sometimes it's because I am. Secretly, I get really nervous every time someone gets close enough to hear me breathe. I have this odd fascination with things like sandcastles and ice sculptures. I assume it's because I usually find myself dedicating time to things that will only last a few moments. That's also why I tend to fall in love with women who will never love me back. I know it sounds crazy, but it's actually much easier than it seems. And to be honest, I think it's safer that way. See, relationships, they often remind me that I'm not afraid of heights or falling, but I'm scared of what's going to happen the moment that my body hits the ground. I'm clumsy. Yesterday, I tripped over my self-esteem. I landed on my pride, and it shattered like an iPhone with a broken face. Now I can't even tell who's trying to give me a compliment. I've never been in the military, but I have this purple heart. I got it from beating myself up over things I can't fix. I know this sounds weird, but sometimes I wonder what my bed sheets say about me when I'm not around. I wonder what the curtains would do if they found out about all the things I've done behind their backs. I've got a hamper that's overflowing with really, really loud mistakes and a graveyard in my closet. I'm afraid that if I let you see my skeletons, you'll grind my bones into powder and get high on my fault lines. Hi, my name is Rudy. I enjoy frozen yogurt, people watching, and laughing for absolutely no reason at all. But I don't allow myself to cry as often as I need to. I have solar power confidence. I have a battery operated smile. My hobbies include editing my life story, hiding behind metaphors, and trying to convince my shadow that I'm someone worth following. I don't know much, but I do know this. I know heaven is full of music. I know God listens to my heartbeat on his iPod. It reminds him that we still got work to do. Thank you.
So that was Rudy Francisco and his poem, My Honest Poem.
Wow.
Yeah, that imagery, right? The delivery with his physical movements and just very vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what everybody said in the chat. Lots of vulnerability. Bravo. Yeah, he's a great poet. He does a lot of work in San Diego with trying to unite poets and, get people to get out of their heads and to share the poems that they have. I really like the line about convincing his shadow that he's someone worth following. I thought that was very moving. His words really struck a chord with me. That's great. So,
excuse me, I felt like he was saying things that other people were too afraid to say. Like he was revealing things and you're like, oh, I felt like that too, but I just have not been bold enough to say it. Yeah, it was so revealing. I was thinking, I wonder if he's ever told people this or he just expresses himself through the spoken word.
Let's see, somebody included in chat. I liked how it was self-referential, like how he said, I hide behind metaphors and followed that with metaphors. Yeah, a lot of humility is shown in his work. He's very, human. I think that's what spoken word in any form of poetry really is supposed to reinforce, is that we are human and this is what humanity looks like. This is what the human experience looks like, sounds like, etc. For the remainder of the class, I would like for us to start practicing some poetry just to get our feet on the ground and see what it's like to start walking. So I have two different options for everybody just to see what we'd want to do. We can either write a found poem, which would be an individual activity. I'm going to provide 3 poems that everybody's going to read a minute each, and then I'll explain the directions further for that in the next slide. Or we can write a Frankenstein poem, which would be a group activity. There are, depending on how many of us there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, there's 8 of us. That's good. We can, if we want to. A Frankenstein poem is basically a poem where each of us provides a line and we just wing it. We just write a poem off the cuff and see what we create. It's pretty cool. That's an option. What would everybody like to do? We have about 25 minutes left. You can write it in the chat. Let me know what y'all think.
I like the option of writing a found poem.
Okay, I'll go ahead and show the instructions for the found poem so that y'all can also see what I'm thinking of. Frankenstein sounds fun. Okay, so to give a better sense of what a found poem is, I've provided 3 poems that we will read a minute each. And all you do is write down every single word that catches your eye. And you don't think about it, you just see it, you write it down, and then you move on. Let's see, I'm down for either. Okay, same here. So we have 1 for Frankenstein and 1 for found poem. Since we have 25 minutes, 24 minutes, let's try out a found poem and go from there. But yeah, I encourage trying out writing the Frankenstein poem with like a group of friends or just people that you know. It's a really fun thing to do. So what we're going to do here. So the first poem I'm going to have y'all read is The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman. I'm going to paste the link in the chat. Go ahead and open that on your computers or if you're on your phone. I recommend using a paper and pen or pencil. Writing it down is just easier than typing it out on like your computer or your phone. And I'm pretty traditional with how I write poetry, so I always encourage using pen and paper. And I'm going to put a timer for a minute. A minute starts now. Okay, so that's the timer. Now we're going to move on to the second poem, which is the Eagle poem by Joy Harjo. So I am including the link for that in the chat. And then we're going to have another minute for writing down the words from this poem. And then when y'all are ready, just give me a thumbs up or nod your head and I will start the timer. Everybody's good. The link for that is in the chat. I'm going to start the timer for 1 minute starting now. Okay, so that's the timer. So go ahead and put your pens and pencils down. Now we're going to move on to the third poem, which is The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. So I'm including the link for that in the chat. Go ahead and open that, and I will start the timer when everyone is ready. All right, so a minute is starting now. All right, so that is the timer. So about how many words does everybody have in total? Yeah, 13. So a good amount of words to have for drafting, 35, that's great. Would be anywhere between 30 and 40 words. 40, okay, that's great.
39.
I think I heard 39. Anywhere between 30 and 40 is good. Janine, how about you? How many words did you have?
50.
Okay, cool. So we're going to do 2 drafts, 39. Yeah, that's great. Michelle, if you want to go back to another poem, yeah, one of the poems that I've provided, and get maybe somewhere around 20 more words, if you want to like put a timer on your phone for a minute and go back and get a few more words, that'll be really helpful for drafting. Yeah. So we're going to do 2 drafts. We're going to do a first draft and then a second draft that we're going to be sharing at the end. Yeah, no worries, Rocket. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for being with us today. So for the first draft, I want y'all to take out 15 words from the list. You got 1 word. That's perfect, a 1-word poem. That'll be super experimental, super modern. Yeah, take out about 15 words from the selection that you've written down and write a poem with what you have. So use some of the elements that we've talked about. Just think about a story that you want to write. Think of a narrative: who, what, where, when, why, how. Think of rhyme, rhythm, and repetition, and how you want to break up the lines of your poem. So for the first draft, so because we only have 14 minutes left, I'll give you all 5 minutes to shave down your selection of words by 15 words. So you're going to take out 15 words and draft your first draft for your poem. So I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes. But here are also some questions for drafting that if you want to reference, I have them up on the screen. So I'm going to set the timer now for 5 minutes. You're going to take out 15 words. So Cameron, you had 40 words. You're going to be left with 25 words, okay? Okay, that is the timer. Now what we're going to do is refine that draft that y'all created and really focus on what is this poem about? What is the goal that you want to have with this poem? Who are you writing the poem to? Who do you want to be able to relate to the poem, just to connect with what you are saying? What effects do you want this poem to have? Think about the emotional aspect of what you've written. Think about the images that you are including and any potential interpretations that people can have when they hear and read your poem. How much do you want to be obvious and how much do you want to leave up to interpretation? So we're going to spend, since we only have 7 minutes left, and I want to be able to get to everybody when we share, let's spend about 3 minutes refining what you have. Doesn't have to be perfect. This is just a second draft, but for the next 3 minutes, go ahead and think about those questions and refine what you have. So 3 minutes starting now. Alrighty, so that is the timer. What we're gonna do now is we're going to share the poems that y'all have written. Who wants to start us off?
I'll go first.
Awesome.
Okay. Sitting down by the quiet, pristine sea, as I pray with a broken dream, pray that a pair of sacred wings take me away to grassy roads and that I become a traveler, witnessing the beauty of the earth, that I see the golden hues of the sun and sky as well as the blues. Does it?
All right, Shafreen, thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
You become a traveler, the image of the graph. I really like the mental movement that I experienced with what you wrote.
Thank you.
So much. Who wants to go next? Don't worry, we're here to just provide feedback for your draft. No pressure, but I would love for somebody to share. We have about 3 minutes left. Cameron, yes, please.
Country eagle descended inside us, knowing all kindness, knowing all colors. Come ages knowing, salt steady morning, polish us pristine, grass leaves breathe fair justice.
I like that consonants, that repetition of the sound in several of your lines. Yeah, thank you for sharing. We have time for a few more if anybody else would like to share.
I'd like to share.
Yeah, please rock it.
So the one word that I wrote down, I kind of just decided to run with it, and it was belly. So I drew a picture of a belly and like wrote my poem inside of the stomach. I don't know if y'all can see. Can you guys see?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And this is my poem. Belly shakes, jiggles, aches, trembles, busts a move like a booty from laughs, floats in the bath, softens the blow of a punch, digests and holds my lunch.
All right. Wow, that sensory imagery. I love that. That was really cool. Yeah, thank you for sharing. That was awesome. From that
Yes.
one word,
She's brilliant.
definitely. Would anybody else like to share? We have about a minute.
I'll go ahead and share what I have.
Yeah, please.
Two roads diverge. I travel both. I pray that earth, sky, and the whole moon can hear me. I pray that every vestige of my life, let me repeat that again. Two roads diverge. I travel both. I pray that earth, sky, and the whole moon can hear me. I love every vestige of life. I love every vestige of you. You make my heart waltz inside of my chest cavity. I need you. That's why I prayed for you. Will slave for you. Want to bathe in your thought process, to bathe in your emotions hopelessly, because I'm hopelessly in love with you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. That repetition, I loved how it compounded. It added like a stack of emotion. That was really cool. Thank you for sharing. Janine, did you have something you wanted to say?
We're just about out of time.
Yeah, I would like to share my first found poem with y'all before we go, just because this exercise was learned from my first poetry teacher from the University of California, Irvine. Her name is Susan Davis. So this exercise was done in her honor. So this is a short poem titled Heavenly Bodies.
Oh, wait, I just wanted to say that I had seen that Michelle wanted to share and they would be the last person. So
Yeah, that would be great. Sorry, Michelle, I didn't see that you wrote you wanted to share.
Oh, it's okay. Mine's pretty short, so I'll go ahead and go. Recovery after defeat, empty promises of peace. I want to envision a world where the globe knows no division, where kindness defeats pride. It is the legacy everyone hopes to leave behind, but it feels more like a dream, like a diamond behind a glass box, beautiful, but just out of reach.
Wow, all right. Yeah.
That was great, Michelle.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, everybody. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to attend my first poetry class. Y'all are my first group of students for poetry. I'm honored that y'all shared this experience with me. Just to give you some parting words so that y'all can reflect on the drafts that you've written, if you want to continue drafting what you've already written, or if you want to write new poems, how you can go about improving your writing. Read a ton of poetry, read that poetry out loud, really tune your ear for those sounds, for that emotional repetition, that build up that really leaves an impact on whoever is experiencing that poetry. Watch Button Poetry on YouTube. That's a really great resource for finding new poetry, new poets who you yourselves can learn from, who I'm constantly learning from. Here's a list of recommended poets that I think y'all should read. This is a combination of traditional and modern forms of writing poetry. These are really great examples of people who I think y'all might like after what we've learned from today's class. If you guys would like to reference what you've learned here today, since there was so much that we had to cover in this hour, please contact me at my email, kwirls19@gmail.com. I can give you guys access to these slides, or if you have any questions about poetry or just want just more resources or anything like that, yeah, feel free to contact me. And I am always happy to be a resource.
And thank you everyone for taking the time to join us. This was great.